We're all on a journey, a road, full of delays, dead ends, with bright and beautiful views and storm clouds and darkness too. It seems somewhere along the way I took a wrong turn. It led me somewhere I didn't want to go. And now, I'm just trying to find my way back. So I'll keep on driving. Keep on searching. This is my journey.
We really are all on a road trip, all on a journey. And that's the opening from a movie called Priceless. And it's a movie about redemption. Not only redemption for the person you hear or see driving down the road, but for the lives that he's going to interact with and touch. And it's actually a are you giving me a signal back there? No, okay. I thought I saw a signal like, do something, Dave. Okay. Sorry about that. Dave, you're not. Anyway, it's been a week. So, anyway, it's a story about a man who has his eyes opened to the whole idea of human trafficking, and he steps into that and really does some good things. So if you have a chance to watch that, it's not necessarily a family fun movie. But it's definitely a movie that will touch your heart and open your eyes to some things. But as we see this whole story, he's on a road trip and he realizes that life is just kind of humming along and he needs to make some changes. And he really sees that even though God doesn't necessarily seem to be in the picture in the moment, but God is there. So he doesn't see God in it. He's introduced to another person, and this person is starting to increase his awareness that maybe God is there even when he doesn't see there. And so for the last few months, we've been talking about this road trip, and this morning we're going to do a little review, come full circle, and then in a little bit of a different place. But the whole idea is that our lives are road trips, and our lives are a road trip of, in a sense, redemption as we come alive to God. And it's just not about us becoming alive to God, us understanding that God can be a part of our lives, but it's actually having that awareness to overflow from our life into the lives of others, into those around. So we keep driving, we keep searching, and we continue on no matter where we're at, no matter if we're a brand new person of faith, if we're a person that's been around for a while, or we're a person that's just checking things out. We're all on this road trip. And Jesus understands this when he uses this language. He uses language, and this language that he's talking about when he's talking about a road trip, it's sometimes to us it seems like a downer for us that have heard these words before, but it's actually words of possibility, words of anticipation, words of encouragement. And when we started our series, we started with this verse. This is a Dave Spencer paraphrase. That's what DFS means. I went to a couple places, different translations, and molded this together. And we read, "Do not look for shortcuts, for the wide exit has a broad road which leads to disaster, and there are many people going that way." And that's not a statement to say, yeah, those people, those bad people, they're going to disasters, and that's what they deserve. No, it's to awaken our eyes and help us to see that there really are no shortcuts. There really aren't any shortcuts. It doesn't mean we avoid working smarter instead of harder. But when it comes to life, there are shortcut options, and those shortcut options really don't pay off. And even when it comes to our spiritual life, there are little gimmicks, little this, little that, little this, and it seems like it's a little quick, easy fix, but there are no shortcuts. And wide is the exit, wide is the on-ramp, the broad road, which leads to disaster, leads to a Christless eternity in the eternal sense, but also leads to disaster in the here and now. And we can all think of times where in our own personal lives where we took a shortcut and other people were taking the shortcut. It says many people are going that way. So we felt a little comfortable taking that shortcut because, hey, my friends are doing it, whether it was with finances, whether it was with relationships, whatever it is. And we're taking these shortcuts and we have other people around us that are doing the same kind of thing. But the reality is that road leads to a bad place. And we need not to be feeling horrible about that, feeling terrible, but that just needs to open our eyes that there are roads that lead to good places and there are roads that lead to bad places. And some are pretty obvious, some aren't so obvious, but Jesus is saying you're on a road trip. Don't do the shortcuts. Don't go along with the flow. Engage your brain, because most people aren't doing that, and watch out. And then he goes on in verse 14 to say this, but small is the exit and narrow the road that leads to life, to full life, to eternal life, yes, but also to fullness of life now. And most people, we sometimes talk about common sense, and we find out that common sense really isn't so common. And again, that's not to put anyone down, but we just see it over and over again. And we easily can see it in somebody else's life. We don't always see it in our own life. But this idea that it's a narrow road. It's a narrow road. There aren't too many people on it because a lot of people are doing the shortcuts. They're not thinking. And that goes on to say, only a few are finding it. Only a few are going in that direction. That direction to life, to God, is vigorous and requires total attention. That idea of being vigorous and total attention. And sometimes in faith circles, we don't realize that we need to be all in. Not all in because we're trying to earn our salvation, but all in because this thing called faith, following Christ, isn't to be a side dish. It's not to be something we just kind of dabble in. We're either in or not in. We need to be in. And it needs to permeate our life, be integrated in our life. And again, that's not to take life away. That's to bring us this full life. It's to avoid some of that disaster. And so as we started this series, we talked about these things a little bit more in depth. And then we got to this place where we had some things to remember about God's direction. And one of the first things we wanted to focus in on when it came to God's direction is to know that it's more like a GPS than a triptych. It's more than like a GPS than a triptych. Now, a triptych, if you've ever got one of those things from AAA, anyone use one of those? If you tell them, they will tell you everything. You can say, I want to go to this restaurant, and it tells you every step of the way. And if anything changes in life, if you're in a different place or you change it, the triptych just doesn't match up. It's just very specific. It's like a blueprint. And sometimes when we come to God's will, God's direction, God's road trip from our lives, there's some of us who have come into this conclusion that it's like a triptych. It's exact. It's like a blueprint. And if we get off one place, it's game over, trip over. So everything from, all kinds of things. And, we talked about that. It's this idea that it's more like it's direction. It's direction when it comes to God. Well, yes, there are some places that are very specific, but for most of us, it's traveling in a direction. Now, we've lived here probably about 4.5 years, and probably the first 2-3 years, every time I go over to the Williamsons compound, because I got like 4 or 5 families living over there in Ovid, I would have to turn on my GPS to make sure I knew how to get there. And I mean, even after going there 6, 7 times, I would still have that GPS. And sometimes the GPS would take me one way, sometimes it would take me another way. I didn't care. I would just do that. And one time I didn't have it on, and in my phone, and I was like I did not know where I was going. But what was nice about the GPS, it just kind of gets you in the direction. It was the destination that was important to me, not whether I took this road or that road. And so a lot of times when it comes to our faith and the road trip we're on, it's more directional than specific. You can get into the big, should I work here? Should I move there? Should I do this? Some of that is directional. You need to ask yourself, where is that going to take me in my directional life? And this may get me into a little bit of trouble. We mentioned the first couple of weeks. I think it's directional even when it comes to the person we marry. Because if it's a blueprint person, then I marry the wrong person, which I didn't, dear. But if I did, if I married the wrong person, and she was supposed to marry that guy, and that guy was supposed to, all of a sudden now I've wrecked everything. I've wrecked a whole community. I've wrecked a whole world because now everybody's off, Well, if it really was supposed to be married to this person, now it's like there's all this kind of thing. So it really is this idea of directional. So when we look at God's will and we look at trying to figure that out, sometimes we get so anxious because we're thinking blueprint when it's really directional for the most part. We even see this in Paul's life in this passage from 1 Corinthians. It says, after I go through Macedonia, I will come to you, for I will be going through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay with you for a while or even spend the winter, so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. He goes on, for I do not want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. But I will stay at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door of effective work has been opened to me, and there are many who oppose me. And you can really see there's some flexibility. I mean, if anybody had like a road map that was exact, you'd think it would be Paul. But Paul's saying, if it works out, if this happens, perhaps, maybe, and those kinds of things. So it's this idea of directional. He knows the direction of his life is to get the message of Jesus out to the greater world. He knows that directionally. He knows that's his will. But whether he stops here, goes there, does this, or whatever, it's a little open-ended. And we talked about those first couple weeks that the reason it's a little open-ended is so you and I lean into our relationship with God rather than just directions. Sometimes when you and I get to the place in our relationship with God, it's just directions. Our life becomes much more legalistic, more rigid, where actually God wants us to relate with Him and experience Him on a regular basis and walk with Him. Larry Osborne says it this way: rather than spelling out everything in detail, it sets forth general guidelines and principles with lots of freedom and flexibility for adjustment as life unfolds. So this idea of it being more like a GPS, more directional than a triptych that's exact when we're thinking about this road trip. Also, we saw that it's more about how we live than where we live. It's more about how we live than where we live. Sometimes we as Christ followers get so hung up on the details that we forget it's about how we live. So let's just take a job. You're wrestling with, should I take this job or take that job? Important. There's some things that might make you lean to one or the other. But what really the bottom line is, even beyond that, is how will you do life in that job? Will you reflect Christian values or won't you? That's pretty clear. You don't have to go, should I act nice like Jesus would at this workplace or shouldn't I? Let me think about it. No, you don't have to think about that. It's obvious. So a lot of times we'll share prayer requests in groups and things, and it's all about the where, the what, rather than the how. So even with sometimes our purchases, how does this purchase reflect Christ's heart in my heart? That's a bigger question. Sometimes I've had friends who have been thinking about moving and buying homes and things like that, and they've come to the conclusion, it's really not. It's not where we buy a home. It's how we're going to be connected with our church. And I've actually had a couple people that have actually, when it comes time, they're ready for a new home, a different home. They actually choose a home that's closer to the church they want to go to, because they know the ripple effects that will have for them in their life. Rather than get the better bang for their buck, more square footage, nicer house that puts them so far away from a community of faith that they want to belong to that it becomes impractical, that they don't do that. They actually choose the home. So it's this whole idea of how, not always where. And it's also interesting when we're thinking about this, when our motives are in the right place, and our motives are never perfect, because none of us are perfect. We never make perfect decisions. They're never 100%. They're off a little bit because, again, none of us are perfect. But what's amazing is that when our heart is in the right place and we're moving in that direction, God, in a sense, comes in and supersedes that. He supersedes my being off a little or a lot when my heart is in the right place. In Proverbs, we read, a person's ways seem pure to them. This seems like a great decision. But the motives are weighed by the Lord. The Lord looks into the heart and goes, is Dave making this decision really because he's trying to follow me? He's a little off on this detail, a little off on that detail, but is his heart in the right place? Yes or no? Hopefully yes. And then it goes on to say, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. In other words, these times where my heart's in the right place, I don't have all the details, I don't have all the experience. Maybe I'm young and starting out, and I don't know how everything, 1 plus 1, I still haven't figured it out, that equals 2, but I'm trying, and God steps in with his grace, because my heart's in the right place, and makes the 75% good decision an actually really good decision. He pulls things together for us. But again, it starts with the how, not the what. And I think as Christ followers at any age, any place in our faith, we ought to spend more time thinking about the how than the what. Because the how reflects more of the heart than the what at times. And that's why we can move on to a very famous passage we like to quote a lot. That's why we can be sure that every detail in our lives of love for God is worked into something good. And I think that what that's saying is when our intentions are the right place, when we're walking with God, doing the best we can isn't asking for room for sloppy living, playing games. I'm not saying that. So if you really are doing the best you can, I know there's been times where I've done schoolwork, and especially when my dad was a school teacher, and I would give him a paper, and I'd go, I did the best I can, and I really didn't, and and he would mark it up with his red ink school pen, and because I didn't do the best I can. There were times where I did the best I could, and it still wasn't great, but there would be a different response from him. Same kind of thing. When we do the best we can, God, who loves us as we're trying to follow him and integrate faith into our life, he works it into something good. And I can think of decisions where he did that. Didn't have all the information, didn't have all the expertise, didn't have the capacity to make a good decision, and all of a sudden, it all comes together. I think that's God's grace and God's love. Again, you don't want to be sloppy with that. You don't want to be haphazard. You don't want to presume on that. I'm going to make a bad decision because I know God at the last minute is going to bail me out. No, we're not talking that. But we're talking when we're really into it. It's amazing because I know some of you folks have pockets of life, or maybe all of life, where you're living the dream. You go, wow, I'm living the dream. But it really is because God has enabled you to live the dream. It really wasn't that you were so smart and wonderful and everything. God just kind of put things together, and you made this deal, you met this person, you were in the right path, you were trying to go in the right direction, but God kind of superimposed. It wasn't that you're such a wonderful self-made person, I'm such a self-made person. God actually stepped in and kind of infused whatever was going on in our life, and now it's something good. And we're like, well, it's because I was so smart. Well, no, it's because God was so gracious in your life. So, anyway. Also, when it comes to this whole road trip, we talked about it's more like an old school Kodak instant picture. I almost don't want to do this, but I have to because some of you don't know what this is. I know I showed this clip. It's only a 30-second commercial, but you'll get the idea if you missed that Sunday what this is. People did dress this way back then, and I think they sang that way, and this is the way commercials were. So some of my problems in life is deemed from these kinds of commercials I had to watch.
Got the instant camera you've been waiting for. Instant color photographs, that's what the handle's for. So carry on. Carry on. Let yourself go. Let yourself go. Grab onto the handle at a low, low price for dry, self-timing color pictures that happen in minutes, right before your eyes. Grab onto the handle and carry on.
The Handle, Kodak's newest and lowest priced instant camera.
There was a time where those of us at Christmas time wanted that camera. That jingle. Yeah, I want one of those instant cameras. But anyway, thankfully that's gone. But the idea, if you saw, they showed the thing. It would develop slowly, and they would say it would develop in minutes. We're like, minutes? That is way too long. They thought that was fast back then. But it would develop in minutes. And you'd watch it, and out of the shadows, all of a sudden you'd see what you really took a picture of. And the film was very expensive, so you didn't want to be like tick 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 tick. But you take this picture and you start to look, and it would take a minute or two to figure out whether everyone was really smiling in it. Well, that was like $3 for that little piece of paper. It's good enough, you know. And what do we all do? We look at ourselves. I'm looking good. The picture's good. If somebody else isn't looking, tough, for them. But I was looking good. So anyway, it would slowly develop. And the same thing kind of happens in this road trip, is that when we're trying to figure out God's direction and God's will in our lives, there's a process. It isn't instant. It takes time, and when we're looking at it, it's after a little while, all of a sudden we start to see what it really looks like. Hindsight is great sight, right? Sometimes you've made some decisions and gone in a certain direction, and then it's a year later, and you go, "Wow, that was a great decision. That was an awesome decision." And it took you a year to figure that out. Sometimes a move. You go, wow, I moved there, I did this, I did that, I didn't do this, or maybe I didn't buy that car, or didn't buy this thing, or did this or whatever. And all of a sudden you see, in a sense, the film has developed, and you go, wow, this is a good thing. And sometimes direction, God's road trip is like that. We read in Proverbs this, the path of the righteous, that doesn't mean perfect. That means someone who's on the path of righteousness. Doesn't mean you get it right all the time. But the path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. And the idea is that as the sun rises and as it's dark in the morning and you start to see clearer. And the same thing happens when you're trying to travel in a direction that honors God, that's aligned with God, that's in relationship with God. As time goes on, you start to see more clearly. See, God's will is like this instant Polaroid or instant Kodak camera. But it's interesting, when we think about that, sometimes when we would have those films, or in the back of the day, when I was a kid, we would actually send our film off to some place. Remember, you had those little Kodak booths, remember those things? You'd drive, there'd be like a little house about this big, and you'd drive and drop off your film and come back, a week or two later, and it would be there. But you wouldn't know what was on the film, or it would take time to see what's on the film. And there were times where all of a sudden you'd get your film back, and like every picture was off, and you'd say, don't ever let Dad take the pictures, or don't ever let whoever take the pictures, because they were all off, and you wouldn't know until you got the film back, or it got developed. And the same thing sometimes with that instant. And occasionally somebody would be in the picture that you didn't intend to be in picture, or somebody was missing from the picture. And today we have a term for that, and we call it photobomb. And this idea that all of a sudden you're taking this picture, you're taking this video, and there's this photobomb. And sometimes for those of us who are trying to follow Christ, we're looking at our life, we're trying to look at the picture, that picture-perfect moment, and we realize that we've been photobombed. And a lot of times it's been photobombed by somebody that's kind of wrecked the moment. And it really bothers us, and it's wrecked the picture, it's wrecked the moment, it's wrecked a part of our lives. We're looking back and go, oh yeah, just even in the last 2 weeks we had this famous, infamous photobombing. Let me just watch this. It was a bus.
Nothing to see here. By the time the city bus moved on, it was all over. Here, by the way, launched 1,000 imitators. This is the internet, after all. This collection came to us courtesy of Sports Illustrated. So look at it this way. While we lost the former wonder of the South, we gained a meme. And by tomorrow, this time, there's something else we'll all be talking.
Photobombed. Happened 2 weeks ago. But when we're looking at our life and we're looking at the plan and we're looking at the direction, and everything seems to be lined up for a picture-perfect moment, there are these times when we're at the scenic overlook and it's spoiled by something. That poor photographer, you could hear the beeps in the background when that was playing. He's set this all up, and that bus ruins everything. Sometimes we find ourselves being photobombed by the situations in our life. Sometimes we find ourselves being photobombed by people, by ourselves, and it spoils everything. A few weeks ago, we were talking about Elijah, and Elijah had this lady named Jezebel. He has this fantastic moment, this fantastic victory, and then all of a sudden, Jezebel moves in with this comment, "You're dead, guy, for what you just did," and it just causes him to collapse. He's done. He's afraid, and he runs for his life. And he gets to a place, he gets to a little broom bush by himself. He leaves his servant, and he sits there. He says, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." You see, he allowed Jezebel to photobomb his life. Same thing can happen to us. We can let people photobomb our lives. We can let circumstances photobomb our lives. And at least in my thinking, there are times when that happens, I ultimately blame God. I say, "God, you photobombed my life. You're in control of all things. I believe that. You have life going. You brought this person into my life, and then they got me. Or you allowed this circumstance in my life. God, you are photobombing my life. My road trip stinks because of you." Sometimes I think that. I'm sure Elijah, he's in a sense, Jezebel was the catalyst, but he's blaming God. He's going, "God, take my life. I'm done. I'm done with this world. I'm done. It's your world. I'm done with your mission. I'm done. I'm done. Have it be over." So we have to come to terms with sometimes when we're on the road trip, there are these moments where we get photobombed. And we get photobombed, and in that moment, that perfect picture just doesn't come out good. But there are other times, and I want to propose more times, and I don't want to seem like I'm downplaying your heartache or your place where you say, "That's when I got photobombed." But in my own life, I've discovered that more than having negative photobombing taking my place, I'm having positive photobombing taking place. There are times where I'm surprised, where I'm watching the development of the film, and at first I'm like, "This is terrible. This is a horrible picture. I hate this picture." And then all of a sudden I realize, wait a minute, there's somebody else in the picture. This is actually a surprise. This is actually a good thing. That actually I've been photobombed, and it's a wonderful thing. Sometimes we've seen these weddings like in Central Park. I don't know if you've seen, and all of a sudden some celebrity is like walking down. I remember seeing Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks somehow is in Central Park, and this couple's getting married, and he kind of just jumps right into the wedding pictures, and they like it. Now, don't do this if you're not Tom Hanks or some celebrity. Don't go, just impose yourself. Someone's doing a wedding at a vineyard, and you just, "Hey!" They probably won't like that. But when it was Tom Hanks, they liked it. They thought that was pretty cool. And so there's times where we get positively photobombed. And it may take a little time for the film to develop, for us to really realize what's going on. But when we do, it's awesome. Watch this.
Backstage at the Tonight Show ride, people think they're about to take their picture taken on stage at the ride, but we're going to surprise them by photobombing them as
us, kind of.
As us, but they don't know that it's
but it's us. It's us. It's all four of us.
Yeah. All right, Gary, let's do this.
Let's do it.
Big smiles. Look right down this lens. Big, big, big smiles. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2,
get that shot? Do we get it? Oh, it's crazy. Did we get it? Did we get it? That is.
There you go.
3, 2, 1. Wait, 3, 2, 1.
My man, my hero since I was like 5 years old. Did we get the shot?
Woo! What's up, dude?
Did we get the? Did we get the picture?
I think we got it. No tears, no tears.
I think we got it.
Hey, dude.
Hi, how are you? Hey, nice to meet you. I think we got the photo, man.
Oh my God, look at that, dude.
Dude, he's got a tattoo of you on his. Oh my! Come over here, let's get a shot.
3, 2, 1.
What I want to propose to you is that often when you and I look at our circumstances, when we look at how life is unfolded, difficulties, people that have been hard, is the film develops. A lot of times, we might just find that God was photobombing that moment. And he's in that moment. And we had no idea. And we didn't see it. And that guy who loved The Rock since he's 5 years old has a tattoo of him on his leg. He's fainting, he's collapsing, he's overcome by meeting The Rock. I want to tell you, I know there's been times in my life. Sometimes I'm not emotionally there yet, but there's definitely some times where I was in uncertainty or new moments, and all of a sudden I realized God was there in the picture. He was photobombing me. And what a great surprise. What a great surprise. I put a couple together, this is when all of a sudden we had our third little girl. We had 3, that was a surprise. And I realized that, wait a minute, God in this moment is photobombing me. He's a part of that. He's a part of that. We just sang Emmanuel, God with us. We talk about that at Christmas time. God is with us in the photo moments of our lives. I know when we came out here and met you folks almost 4.5 years ago, and there's the picture, but no, there was more going on. God was, Lynn will like the fact that the glow's coming out of his head, but you know new Lynn, but God was in that moment. Yeah, right. Pay attention to the wise men in the stable, okay? All right. Even the hard times. You may remember this. You may remember this. That's when I took a flying leap. But God was in that too. I didn't think in the moment, but God was there. The fact that I can walk and talk means God was there. The other guy who broke his neck, God was there. 5 broken vertebrae, God was there for me. Even then, see, Starbucks, God was there in 2 different ways, but had to use the straw, but, photobombed. God was a part of that. Later on, back on my feet with my daughters, with my wife. God's a part of that. He's photobombing that. You see, the bottom line to this whole idea is that you and I can trust God farther than you can see. You and I can trust God farther than we can see. We're on this road trip. We're all on it, no matter where we are in our faith journey. We're all on a road trip. And there are times where we have to come to terms with what's going on in our life, and it seems like God negatively photobombed our lives, or someone else did. But I'm telling you, not to do away with the heartache and the tragedies all of us have experienced. All of us have a story. But if you take some time and look, And it may take some time for that scene to develop, for the film to develop. There'll get to be a place where you can say, and a lot of them, God was there even though it didn't seem like he was a part of the picture. And so you and I, as we're on this road trip, can trust him further than we can see. Because after all, Emmanuel is God is with us. And God photobombs us often. Let's close in prayer. Father, all of us are going through the albums of our lives right now, and we're seeing pictures and moments of difficulty, moments of tragedy. We're seeing moments that were just so hard, a loss of a loved one, an illness, somebody who was just horrible to us, and we can see how all of that was photobombed into our life, and we didn't see it coming, and as it all develops, that situation, that person is in the picture of our lives. They're a part of our photo. We can't expunge them from it. But Lord, then there's also these times where we can see where even in those hard things, even in those difficult things, even in those unspeakable things, we can see that you can come into the picture and you can actually photobomb it. You can actually surprise us. You can actually take a tragedy and you can shed some light into it, and all of a sudden we see that you are present. Some of us are familiar with that story about the footprints in the sand, and that time where a person's walking and they only see one footprints and they come back to you, Father, and say, "Where were you?" And you respond, "I was carrying you in that moment." So sometimes it's the fact that you carried us through. So Lord, help us to be a people, help us to move towards the idea that you can be there, we can trust you further than we can see you. And Father, for those of us who understand that in our head in a moment like this, but we're just not feeling it in our heart, I pray that you'd give us time and give us grace and get us to that place. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.